Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, Estonia's Security Council membership has unfortunately ended. We would like to stay longer, of course, but rules are rules. And we would like to actually share with you some of our thoughts and conclusions on it. And I will now give the floor to Ambassador Jürgenson, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. I can't believe it's over. People are asking me sometimes whether I'm sad or happy that it's over, and I'm joking that it's kind of like when your friends and relatives are coming. It's a really happy occasion, but it's also good when they go, And in this sense, I really learned to appreciate the permanent members as well, because their friends and relatives are sitting on the couch forever, and there is no end to it. But more seriously, it's been an amazing ride and an amazing experience. And most of all, I truly, sincerely feel that it's been an honor to serve on this council. And looking back, and we are taking stock right now on the experience, writing memos, there's a book coming out in Estonia at some point and so on, and what the experience were. Most of them, I have to say, I wouldn't have expected that are positive. Some of them are negative. But one of the things that happens, especially in small countries, but countries that are elected members not so often, is that there's a debate back home that always, whether it's worthwhile, putting resources into it and so on. And one of the arguments that was put forward in Estonia before we joined and when the campaign was still going on was that it's the permanent five that are doing everything, and elected members, especially small countries, cannot do anything. And that is an experience that I have, is that it's completely false. I think when I look back, first of all, there is no difference whether you are big or small. You are a member of the council, and there was not a moment when I felt that I'm like a younger brother or something, that somebody was looking down on me. And secondly, 99% or even more of the work of the council was actually 15, really. It was not 5 plus 10. And very few occasions when the permanent members were doing their own thing and especially doing good vetoes. And last year we were close to having a 0 veto year, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And also what was a positive experience was that we worked really as a family, and it's something that, looking back, it's kind of obvious how and where it comes from, because you are together pretty much every day. And so it's like a club inside the club. There is 193 members. That is already a family. But then inside there, there is a separate family that is really working together. And the personal relationships in the council, even though there were arguments, and sometimes quite severe ones across the table, but the personal relations actually didn't suffer from that. And that, I think, is a positive factor in working as a diplomat. It should never become personal. The other thing that we discovered that was interesting was that before going to the council, like every member state, we made a list of our priorities in the council, like international law and rules-based world order for Estonia, accountability, women's rights, and so on. And the question for us, without any experience in the council, was how to show these priorities that we have. And not knowing how the council works beforehand, I had a feeling that it's mostly with special events and meetings and so on. That is also true. But actually, even more, you can show your priorities every day in every single portfolio, actually. When we talk about Ethiopia, when we talk about Myanmar, in Afghanistan, you can always talk about women's rights and accountability and issues like that. The other important thing that I'm trying to convey to our successors in the council is that when it's a kind of a, for small countries especially, it's a generational project. You know, Estonia has already put in candidature for next time, and it will be 2050. So it's going to be one generation of diplomats, like every 30 years. And it was calculated, actually, what the normal sequence would be for a country of the size of Estonia. When you look at some bigger countries who are there, try to be every 8 years, then you have a little larger countries every 20 years, and we thought, okay, Estonia would be 30 years. But that means when going to the council, it would not be worthwhile going there just to sit and give the speeches, you know. And so therefore, we tried to be as ambitious as we could, as active as we could, but cautiously ambitious, so that when we had a feeling that our feet are touching the ground already, let's grab more. And as you know, there is an issue like what is called pen holdership. And for the second year in the council, Estonia decided that now we can do more. And we grabbed the pen for, together with Norway, for Afghanistan when it was left over by Germany and Indonesia when they left. And then also with France, the European Union mission to enforce arms embargo in Libya called Irini, that we took together with France. So these are important issues. Then the other thing, what we tried to do was to bring on the table issues that we found really important for the new security environment in the world, that have been a big issue for Estonia, and I believe it should be also for the world, like cybersecurity. And we got cybersecurity officially on the table during our second presidency in June for the first time in Security Council history, and I'm really proud of that. We were also able to raise issues of concern in our own neighborhood that all countries are trying to do, and especially Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, things like that. The time in the council, the 2 years that we were there, I have to say, it was pretty tough. And not only that, there is a lot of work anyway in the council, but two specific issues. And one of them was, of course, the pandemic that we mentioned a little bit before we started. The last meeting that we had, in-person meeting 2020, was on 12th of March, and then the New York and United Nations went to lockdown. But I'm glad to say that Security Council, as you remember, actually started pretty fast. There was 1 week when we were just sitting at home, then there was 1 week of testing the platform, the video VTC platform, and then we started already meetings, first slowly, but by the time of our presidency in May, we had 100% of the working program already. And then there was a slow, opening up, and COVID struck again, and the second presidency in June of last year, we managed to get 100% back to in-person meetings already again. The other thing that we've been trying to do consciously was actually trying to use the opportunities that we have, and even though the pandemic was an awful thing, of course, but we managed also to get some positive things out of it, and to show to the UN membership our development in digital sphere. And the VTC meetings that we organized, the ARIA formula meetings, the first one on the 8th of May 2020, we were able to show the quality of our work, and it's been paying off. So there were also positive things where some of the things, of course, on VTC are easier to organize. It's easier to get high-level participation that we had for our informal meetings, like 40 foreign ministers and so on. But at the same time, the big problem that I find is that I'm sometimes saying that diplomacy is actually a contact sport, and it was clearly visible how this contact was lacking. And one of the examples that I brought is, you remember when the Council tried to pass the resolution supporting the Secretary General's call for global ceasefire in all the conflicts and on COVID and pandemic. And the work started during Chinese presidency already in March, and it continued until early July. And because of geopolitical rivalries, it took 3.5 months, and there is no proof to that, of course, but I have a kind of a feeling when I look at other kinds of difficult issues in the Council that if we would have been working in person, I'm sure it would have been easier to solve and it would have come faster. The other issues and disappointments were with the concrete work on some issues where we saw that the situation was getting completely out of hand. It was really difficult, still really difficult to get issues on the table. One of them, Ethiopia, for example, where we saw what's happening in Tigray and around it, but it was really hard to get any products or press statements or even official meetings on this. Myanmar is the same example, you know, where we saw that people were dying, women and children, and we did not manage to do much of anything. Then another disappointment, you know, when I look at all the conflicts on the table, in the 2 years that we've been there, we didn't manage to get a resolution to any of them. Of course, it would have been too ambitious to think that we go there and we solve the big problems. But I could divide the issues on the table into two kind of separate lines or portfolios. And there are conflicts that are understandably extremely complicated to solve. Like, let's say, Middle East, you know, there is no easy way out. Nobody really feels what exactly should be there, how to solve it. But then again, there were issues where I think it shouldn't have been so difficult. You know, you could see the way out. You could see the possibilities to solving them. And they are like Yemen, for example. And I think it shouldn't be something that would be unsolvable. And especially also looking at one particular case, for example, there is this Safar oil tanker that is rotting on the shores, and Yemen and their whole neighborhood is actually on the brink of a major environmental disaster. And when we came to the Council in January 2020, the first meeting on Yemen, we heard about Safar tanker and we started talking about it, and 2 years later, we're still talking about it. And this is one ship, damn it, you know, that, like, let the UN people on board, let the engineers go and solve it. And so that's the disappointment. The other one, Syria, you know, and when we started in January, one of the first things was actually the extension of the cross-border humanitarian aid mandate. And there were 4 border crossings, an extension for 1 year, and then it was 2, and now there is only 1 border crossing, and there are millions of people who are dependent on that. And of course, the cross-line aid is increasing, but it's still not an answer to the problem. There are 2 different working, how would I put it? 2 different things that the Council is doing. You know, one part is the meetings that we have and the speeches that we give, and the other part is the products. And Security Council is one of the few bodies in the world that creates international law, and so therefore everybody understands the essence and the usefulness of the products of the Council. I've heard from critics of the Council of what is the usefulness of the speeches that we give. And it's a legitimate question, you know, but at the same time, at some point, I started thinking that when you look at the sides to the conflict on the table of the Council, it's interesting how closely they are monitoring what is being said, what Estonia was saying about this or that issue. And then I started thinking that it means that it should make a difference, because otherwise, why would they be so interested? And also when looking in the same context, you know, looking at the conflicts that I said are not being solved, you could say that the Council has failed, we haven't managed doing anything, but at the same time, it might also be possible that without the Council, they would be much, much worse. And it's again something that is a gut feeling. Nobody can exactly say what is the truth over there. And secondly, it's kind of difficult to understand the criticism of the Council as such, because just like United Nations, I'm sometimes saying that United Nations in a kind of way that people think doesn't exist, because it's not a body. There are 193 member states. And to criticize that we do not manage to do something, it's as criticizing yourself, you know, criticizing the world. Just like criticizing democracy and the parliament. We don't like the parliament. Well, it's us. Let's look into the mirror. And the same applies to the Council. There are 15 member states, and we are as good as we are. What I can also say is the 10 elected members that we were, I think it was a fantastic group. I'm really sincerely happy with what the relations we had, the things we tried to do, and the same goes to my own team. It's been absolutely fabulous, you know, working with the team that we had, both here and in the capital, and the contacts and communication we had with the capital. And the dynamic of the Council, what I would also like to mention, like I said earlier, you know, what was tough was first the pandemic and the situation we had with that, but then the geopolitical issues and the situation among the big ones was actually not an easy one to solve. And I mentioned already the pandemic, then there was an issue on Iran, then Middle East, where there were different views on certain issues, especially, you know, then Syria. We were not expecting, of course, nobody was expecting, and as we were pen holders on what happened in Afghanistan in August, so we were already preparing an extension of UNAMA mandate that was in September, and preparing the resolutions, of course, takes months. You know, you consult with other members and so on. And finally, the extension of the mandate was very different from what was in the works, of course, because it was just a technical rollover, because nobody knew what's going to happen over there. A little bit of the numbers, you know, we had more than 800 meetings. One thing that also made us proud is that when you look at one of our area meetings that was on 8th of October last year on Belarus, we had 32 co-sponsors and to the meeting, and this is a record, all-time record of all informal meetings of the Security Council. And the number 2 was 24 co-sponsors that also belongs to Estonia. So we hold the number 1 and number 2 seats over there. But overall, like I said, it was an amazing experience. It was an honor, and it's a strange feeling that it's over. And for us, it was not only the 2 years, because it was a contested seat, and so for our team and myself, it was more years than just 2 in the project. But I will stop here, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Yeah, please.
Ambassador.
Yes, thank you. I do have one wanted to say, colleagues joining us from WebEx, if you can just raise your hand if you have questions from there, because unfortunately the chat, I don't see the chat. And we will go to Edie and then Philip in the virtual.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you for doing this very interesting wrap-up and your insights on how the Council worked in your eyes over the last 2 years. I have a question about an issue on the global agenda, which the Council has been dealing with for years, and that is North Korea, the DPRK. We've seen in the past few weeks a series of ballistic missile launches by the DPRK. In your view, if you were still on the Council, what do you think that the Council could and should be doing?
I think this is one of the subjects on the table of the Council where the could and should are very different. Because they are looking from our side point of view, there are issues that the Council should do with resolutions and so on, but at the same time, you know exactly where the dice is at the moment, and looking at the split among the permanent members, it's quite obvious that there are limitations of what the Council could do. This is an issue where if there would be a resolution moved forward, there would be a veto quite clearly, and it's even a subject that is really difficult to bring to a program of work. So it is one of the difficult subjects, just like what we see also in Syria, for example, where it's really difficult to get things moving. But so therefore, in a way, like I said, there are differences between could and should, but secondly, unfortunately, because of that, I do not have an answer.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Lisa. Bonjour, Mr. Ambassador. I'm curious to know, during your 2 years, which country was the most complicated to deal with? Is it the US? You had 1 year with Trump and 1 year with Biden. Is it Russia, maybe China, and why? Thank you.
For us, it's understandable if you look at our neighborhood and if you look on the map, you know, and where we are and our history, it's clear it was Russia for us. But even there, I would say that I appreciate the personal relations that we had, because you saw the Council meetings. Actually, there were very many occasions where we were on different sides, and not only Estonia alone, because usually most of us actually we were on the same side with the like-minded. On the first countries that you mentioned, I can just say that, let's say that the second year was easier than the first one. And for many reasons. That was one of the reasons that you mentioned also. But these were the difficult situations, you know, when you look at, like I said at the beginning, you know, that we were last year close to being ending a year without a single veto. Then at the end of the year, we finally got the veto, and we got a veto actually on a subject that, being honest, you know, it should not be so divisive, because the security implications of climate change are quite obvious to everybody. And it was also clear that the resolution on climate and security, it was not a duplication of IPCC or the General Assembly work that is going on, but it was clearly targeted towards implications on the questions of international peace and security by climate change, like migration and conflicts and so on. So these kinds of issues, so it's hard for me to say that it's been more difficult to work with this or that country, but rather I would say that there have been more difficult and less difficult issues, and it's hard to divide, you know, with whom. And when you say, and I mentioned already earlier, you know, issues like JCPOA, for example, on Iran, that was a difficult in a sense that there was a choice between our good allies, you know, with whom, because the division did not run according to traditional lines of division in the council, but it was between our good friends. Middle East was another issue where you saw the division not according to the I don't want to use the words, but basically I think that's what we have. It's a kind of a new Cold War situation where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Lenka and then Celia and then James.
Thank you, Ambassador. You are a very experienced diplomat. Has the Security Council taught you anything new in your skills? And then second, with the development of technology, do you believe that there will be different demands on diplomats, what they should be doing or from what is now? Thank you.
I think the main thing that I really, I can't say that I learned personally something new, but one thing that I learned is already what I mentioned, is the teamwork that we have had. It's been an enormous pleasure to work with the team, our own team. It's just amazing. And there has been, when I look at the debate that I mentioned earlier, you know, whether it's worthwhile, and then one of the arguments on the side of it being worthwhile going to the council was not only in Estonia, but also in what I've heard from other smaller countries that are going in, was that it will give a good experience to our diplomats, you know, that they learn and they will be better diplomats and it would be useful for our foreign service. And this is clearly a case. I think, first of all, we already had excellent diplomats, but the kind of motivation and how they were learning to work in this extremely intense schedule, you know, and the communication that was going on. So therefore, what I see now when the council is over as one of my tasks as the ambassador responsible for the team is what I talked to some members who were, or some countries that were members before us, and they said that they had the same argument, but then again, you know, the diplomats who go home because our team is 3 times larger than in a normal circumstance. And so it happens in the winter, but most of the rotations happen in summer, and many of our predecessors are complaining that even though that was an argument and even though that did happen, but actually this experience was wasted, you know, that the diplomats were scattered around in doing things where it didn't really work. So therefore, what I'm trying to do is now, from my part also, to try to help as much as I can for the diplomats to find good jobs, that that would be a win-win situation, you know, for the ministry, for the country, but also for these people. And so this is one of the things. But secondly, really, I've been part of trying to get Estonia into the European Union, and I was ambassador in Washington when we got invited to NATO. So these are existential big issues for Estonia, but I can still say that how intense the work has been this is something that probably has trained me as well, you know, and Estonia was, in 2017, we had the presidency of the European Union, for example, and it was a comparison that was sometimes given back home. But I would say it's very, very different, you know, that because first of all, European Union presidency is for 6 months, and it's a very different kind of emotionally, physically, you know, doing it for 6 months or for 2 years. And secondly, it was also the presidency of the European Union encompasses actually pretty much the whole society. You know, you have all the ministries, how much of it is foreign policy, how much of this is really internal politics. But the group of people involved in the Security Council, of course, is smaller. But when it's like running a marathon, but with a speed that usually goes to a sprint, and you go it for 42 kilometers, it's not easy. So therefore, I would say, yes, it has been teaching me some things, but most of all, the cooperation in a broadest sense of the term, you know, cooperating with other countries, but also with our own team, with the time difference and so on, the communication we had with the capital that really worked like a clockwork as well, you know, and these are the kinds of issues that I believe also when I talk about the experience our diplomats got, for example, it's not only the experience in international organizations or United Nations, but experience as diplomats, and it can be used anywhere. Thank you.
Yes. Just quickly with the technology, do you believe
technology, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I forgot that. I think one thing that this pandemic taught us was the good and the bad of technology. You know, that the good is that when there was a lockdown, and I said, you know, 2 weeks later, Security Council started to work already. When others, the 193 member states were sitting at home, we were the only body that was working at the time. So that was the positive thing, that we could start, we could do, and we learned a lot. I remember when the first meetings that we had, even though the technology existed, but there was no push, there was no need really to use it. I remember how weird it was to talk to a computer, you know, like, how do you do this? And then you got used to it. So there are things that we have to bring over from the experience and take the positive out of it. But at the same time, we should not overdo it, because like I said earlier, with some examples, you know, that again, diplomacy still is a contact sport, and we should not take the easy way out, you know. And the other interesting thing that I discovered in the middle of it, you know, is that is counterintuitive, is that when we were sitting at home and doing VTC, then interestingly, and I talked to some other colleagues, we were more busy than in normal world, you know. And I was thinking, actually, how come? Because, you know, that we don't waste time from walking from a meeting to a meeting, you know, you could just click and you are participating in another meeting. But one of the things that I think, I don't know, it's my own interpretation or analysis, is that the other communications are so much more cumbersome and slow, you know, when we were doing things, you know, just talking to our own team, you know, to Lisa, whoever, you know, first it was on WhatsApp, but then we moved to Signal because it's more secure. But look at how slow it is, you know, you put in the text, and otherwise you could just, Lisa, do this, do that, and things work. You are together, you know, the meetings, it's all faster. So there are things that we consciously should analyze, actually, what we should take over and learn from it, but at the same time, we should not take in some ways, I could say, easy way out, you know. It's always easier to well, let's have a meeting, let's have it on Zoom, you know, but whether it will be as efficient as real meetings, I doubt. So thank you.
Célie.
Merci, Ambassador. Some non-permanent members have complained in the past that the Council is a two-speed Council, meaning that you have the permanent 5, and they make the decision. Then you have the others, the 10 non-permanent. Have you experienced that? Have you been always part of their discussion, especially the most important discussion, or have you feel left aside of the discussion?
Merci beaucoup. I would first say we would like them to be, now already them, it used to be us, to call elected members, not non-permanent, because I think the advantage that we have that us being elected members, it gives us credibility, you know, because we were elected to this post. But I said already in my introduction, I have to say, I didn't experience this. There were very few occasions, maybe, and there was also something happening behind our backs that we didn't even know. But the feeling that we had was that 99% of the time the work was going on as 15. Of course, there were issues where the main players in a certain issue were talking to each other. Like when we talk about this COVID resolution, for example, then there was not much that we could have done, even though on our initiative together with Germany, when the resolution was completely stuck, and the resolution was presented by Tunisia and France, and when it was completely stuck, nothing happening, and it was so frustrating, we tried to shake it out of this deadlock, and we presented actually an alternative resolution, a short one, not pushing for any mentioning of WHO or whatever, just because the main reason for this resolution was to support the Secretary General. That was the message. And so if you make it, the broader you make it, the more contentious issues are there. It didn't work out, but at the same time, I'm quite confident that it was useful that we did it. It pushed it out. But that shows actually that elected members can do the same thing. If you look at the pen holdership that we have, it used to be the prerogative of only permanent members, that they were holding the pen and we were dealing with all the subsidiary bodies. Estonia was chairing the sanctions committees on Iraq and Sudan, for example, that maybe it will just keep us busy on those issues and we do not mess around. There is no feeling like that. Our pen holdership now was on an issue, Afghanistan. You know, this is one of the biggest issues on the table at the moment. And it was 2 elected members who were doing this. And there was not like I said, there was not a single moment when we were when we had a feeling of being looked down, you know, from the permanent members. And that applies to official work of the council, but also to unofficial relationships that we had, like when we had SOFA talks, for example, a new informal format of meetings that we have. There was clearly a work of 15. And that I take as really positive. And overall, you know, the personal relationships and everything, I appreciate it very much. And I hope that being out of the council, that they will continue. Thank you.
James Bays, Al Jazeera, and as it's your last briefing, I'm going to be a bit greedy and ask 2 questions, if you don't mind. First, the latest thing we've seen is a cyber attack on Ukraine, an area that you have focused on during your time in the council. As someone who was born in a country that was then part of the Soviet Union, I'd like your perspective. What do you think is Putin's strategy? And the big question, is he going to invade? And the second question is on Afghanistan. You talked about the surprise you had in August, but I suspect you had some surprise earlier in the year in the way that the US followed through with its diplomacy and did what it said it was going to do, and people thought it might actually support the government of Afghanistan, and it didn't. I've spent time in Afghanistan, including in Helmand with Estonian troops. Was it all worth it, and did the US let down its allies?
Both are extremely difficult questions. There can be many different answers as well. And a lot of these answers are speculations. And if I could just speculate, then I can say that on both of those issues, my answers are my personal views. I cannot, you know, there are no right or wrong answers. I cannot say, you know, the position of my government or something.
No, your perspective.
My perspective, yeah. What Putin is trying to do, what he wants to get, is kind of understandable. What he's trying to do, not so much. You know, whether there will be war, nobody knows. I would personally say I doubt it, because everybody knows how much there is to lose, you know, including Putin. And also, when you see what happened in 2014, then it was kind of also easier for Russia to do what they were doing, because, you know, Ukraine was clearly split into 2, Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine, and the split was also on ethnic issue basis and so on. So it was easy to sort of inflate the issues that were there and then just to move in with their troops or the little green men because, you know, they didn't exist. Yes, they did. But when you look at the situation now and you would ask actually what could they be after, of course there could be what is just geographically and practically necessary would be the connection between Eastern Ukraine and Crimea, for example. That would be easier to do. But when you look at the all around Ukraine where Russian troops are there, we are not living in the 30s anymore, you know, or the 40s of last century. And what, you know, moving in and trying to invade some parts of Ukraine proper, first of all, the Ukrainian military is much stronger than it was in 2014, so it's not an easy task to do. But secondly, also, you also have to govern. You know, you can't occupy a country and continue, you know, for a long time with a population that doesn't accept you. But we saw this also happening actually last year in spring, and that was a kind of a blackmail in getting to the table. But now what is more complicated is, you know, the ultimatums that Russia is putting out are such complete nonsense that it's clear to everybody, including Russia itself, that it's 100% of what's in there is absurd. You know, it's unacceptable. It's when I was working in Washington, you know, there was. And I was working towards NATO enlargement, and in American English language, a lot of people were talking about NATO expansion, and I was always correcting them. We are not talking about NATO expansion, we are talking about NATO enlargement, because expansion would mean, and that's what the Russians and Lavrov and so on are claiming, is that NATO is expanding, and just a few days ago, Lavrov even said that, you know, the countries that are left orphans after the collapse of the Soviet Union, now NATO is moving in and expanding itself. First of all, Radek Sikorski, a member of European Parliament, said quite clearly is that in one of the tweets that it was, we can't miss you and we are not orphans because you were not our daddy. You were more like a serial rapist, and we will never miss you. And it's true, you know, when it's just ugly language, but that's exactly what it was, you know. And it was not that NATO wanted to expand. I remember how we wanted to become a part of NATO. It was really hard because NATO did not want to expand. We wanted to get in, and I think every country should have an opportunity. And when I was ambassador in France, you know, I was talking to one of the political analysts over there, and she was saying, a young lady, you know, she was saying that it was in 2014, you know, that the West and Russia should sit together and decide on, you know, Ukraine remaining neutral and so on. And my question, where she didn't have an answer, was just, but what about Ukrainians? You know, that. It happened already. It happened to us, you know, when decisions were made over our heads, and for 50 years Estonia was occupied. So what is going to happen with these ultimatums? What is really makes it hard and difficult is that the ultimatums are put in a way, like I said, that none of those proposals are acceptable, and it's understood by everybody. So if this kind of a document on the table, how can you find a compromise? How can you, what is the way to talk yourself out of this? And in diplomacy, you should never paint yourself into the corner. You should be able to actually have some moves. So it's a very tense situation, but it probably also has something to do with Putin's popularity and his future. When you look at the first Ukrainian invasion in 2014, you know, his popularity suddenly exploded because there is no free media in Russia. You know, it's all propaganda trying to boost the popularity. When you look at what happened to Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, you know, that was one of the hopes maybe for Putin for the future, you know, staying behind, just like when Medvedev was prime minister and Putin was still, Medvedev was president and Putin was prime minister, still running the country. Now the Kazakhstan way probably is not the way, you know, because the lessons learned is that once you are not there, it might end badly for you. So the diplomatic efforts are there, their work is going on. But what exactly is Russia planning to do. There was this cyber attack that you mentioned. It seemed very much as raising the stakes, you know, that making them higher and kind of a threat again, because the attacks themselves were kind of similar, even though technically different things, but principally similar what happened in Estonia in 2007, when we had these massive DDoS, or distributed denial of service attacks, that were uncomfortable, but they didn't destroy data. There was no, you know, it was technically not very sophisticated, and it was possible to, you know, for us in the end it was even useful because we got the NATO Center of Excellence for Cybersecurity. Everybody, it was a wake-up call to everybody, and now it's the same kind of a thing, that it didn't sort of hurt Ukraine too strongly, but it was a threat, it was a warning, it was just making life uncomfortable, and it was just part of the same tension and the game that is going on at the moment. My own interpretation, I might be wrong. On Afghanistan, yes, absolutely. You know, the disappointment of what happened over there and how it was done, it was out in the public. You know, all the others who were there for a very long time. It was the longest mission for everybody. You know, and but I would still say that it was not, in a sense, completely wasted, because if you remember, you know, when Taliban came to power again, everybody started thinking, now it's been for months already, you know, September, October, November, December, you know, 4 months, 5 months, at least so far, if you compare to Taliban, to the old Taliban, when there were stonings of women and stadiums, you know, and so on, even though a lot of things that we see happening are just awful, if you look at what the women got as rights already during the 20 years or so, and the moving back, it's horrible. But at the same time, there is a big difference, you know, and the society did develop into a society where it's difficult to repeat what happened the last time. So there were positive issues. For us, of course, you know, the cooperation that we had with our allies and the stronger relations that we have and so on. But at the same time, you know, sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail, and in a way we could say that it was a failure, but at the same time there was also worthwhile issues then with human rights and rights of women that even though there has been a setback, are still actually much stronger than they were many years ago. But how it was carried out, you know, it was Donald Trump who said that we will do this. Biden carried it through exactly and took it over. But the coordination could have been probably better. But also part of it is that even though there are people who say, looking back, you know, it was easy to see, you know, but I don't think that many analysts could see what happened in August, you know, that when people are talking about, you know, October, November, you know, it was coming, but the speed of it and how it was, there are also, of course, objective reasons why it happened like that, you know, the feeling of betrayal by the Afghan military and so on and so on. So there were many different issues, but that was a surprise. And if it wouldn't have happened in August, there would have been more time for, you know, more organized preparations of next steps and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, if it's a very quick question, because you need to get to the daily press briefing.
Ambassador Mohamed Picard, Le Figaro. I was going to ask an extended question. I'll make it short. Fact-finding missions. There was a rocky one in the Sahel a few months ago. Do you believe this tool could be improved, widened, and so that the Council would be more visible, more useful? For instance, go to Ukraine as a fact-finding mission, or anything that you think would make the Council help reinvent itself and become less discredited in today's world? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, because this is something that I forgot to say in my introduction. I was planning to do this. I think I'm so glad that we got this mission to Sahel, or the visit, because knowing from my predecessors, this is a very big part of being in the council, and usually there are even, I think, 5 visits to conflict zones in the world during a year. We were close to being the only class of the Security Council with not a single visit. But gladly, the situation with COVID for a moment was such that we could go there. I have to say it was massively useful. It was really useful for the Council to understand and to the situation and so on. Even though, you know, when we went there, when I looked at the program that we had, it was mainly, you know, you go in, it was very quick, you know, you go in, there was a meeting, back home. And I was thinking, you know, what's the difference? This is something we could do, you know, on a VTC platform, but clearly no, you couldn't. You know, the level of understanding in these few days that were there, that we learned, is absolutely uncomparable. You know, that it's even difficult to define, you know, why being there and talking to people over the table is different. But whether we need more of it, it's hard for me to say, because we only had one. And if we would have 5 a year, like in a usual council situation, I can't say whether it can be improved or not, because what we had, like I said, was extremely useful, and we could also see the comparison, you know, in the same region. You know, when you compare Mali and Niger, you know, in exactly the same kind of situation, but you could see the usefulness and the positive impacts of democracy. You know, when you look at the situation, even though because of the neighborhood it's very difficult, but when you look at Niger, you know, they had a peaceful change of power after democratic elections, and the result is that the country is different from the situation from Mali, like night and day. You know, you have the G5 Sahel force, of course, that is there trying to keep the region calm and trying to work there. But the country itself, you know, if there would be a government and a democratic situation in Mali like it is in Niger, I think there would be a very different situation already. And this is something that you can read about, but you don't feel and understand when you don't go there. And so it was quite an eye-opener for me. And so therefore, I'm really sad that it was only one visit that we had. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will conclude the press conference. And I also wanted to say thank you from my side for these 2 years, the cooperation that we had, to the whole media corps. So hope I will see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.